This is Truth Frequency Radio.
No hate, no hype, no fear. Real people, real radio.
And welcome back, everyone. Second hour is underway here on Truth Warrior. I'm your host, David Whitehead. And wow, what an action-packed first hour there with John Rappaport. Can't say enough about the man. I wish we had some more time with him to have him finish up his points. He's definitely one of those great researchers that really wants to get the information out that everybody needs to hear about, but also do it in a way, as he said, that is not going to overload your mind and put you in a more of a negative state. It's really there to empower you, and I very much resonate with his message about connecting with that inner imagination, the deepest part of you. And that's why I bring people on this show that are bringing you pertinent information but are balancing it out with the true idea of what it is to fully realize yourself and fully realize your potential, and to not be pessimistic, but to realize that the change that we all are looking for, it lies within each and every one of us. And there is really no coincidences out there if you think about it in that way. There's so many things that have happened to me personally have happened from a time when I felt helpless, when I felt like I was a victim, and yet the circumstances came about where I started to realize that that was all an illusion. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody listening to this show is walking away with valid information, but is also feeling empowered and realizing that there is great things to come, as well as, yes, great challenges. So with that being said, the second hour, I'm very excited about this as well. We got a great show here tonight, and I've got to say that this gentleman that I'm bringing on now, Scott Onstott, he was someone that sort of came across my desk, I would say, maybe about a year ago, and I watched probably the first hour or so of his film online, which is Secrets in Plain Sight. And then I kept going back, and other people were sending me clips of it, and people kept talking about it. And it just kind of, you forget about certain things. I look at so much information and so many researchers, and I don't have time to go through every single one. But this gentleman just kept popping back in. And a funny, quick little story there. We were on the tour earlier this year, and my good friend Matt Allen from the Ancient Order, he was begging all of us on the trip to throw on Secrets in Plain Sight, because we had lots of highway ahead of us. We had hours of time to kill, and the documentary film Secrets in Plain Sight is probably a good 3.5 or so hours. And so he kept going, hey, we should watch the Secrets in Plain Sight. We should watch Secrets in Plain Sight. And we're like, yeah, we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. And finally we did. We sat down, we checked it out, and I was reminded of it, and I was reminded of the brilliance of it. And I had done research on this through other people's work and reading books like David Oveson, talking about the secret architecture of the nation's capital, and so many other great authors that were referenced in this film. And so it was just a circumstance in a way where I was reminded of his work, got in touch with him, had a great conversation, and now he is going to be one of the keynote speakers on our next upcoming tour, which you can find out more about at modernknowledge.ca. So it's an honor to have him on the tour. It's also an honor to have him on the show. And I'll just give you a quick bio for those that aren't familiar with his work. Scott is a writer, trainer, filmmaker, and artist. And he earned a degree in architecture from the University of California at Berkeley, and worked in a number of prominent architecture and engineering offices in San Francisco in the first chapter of his career. He transitioned to teaching university students how to use AutoCAD, Revit, Photoshop, 3ds Max, and SketchUp, and then started writing books and recording training videos on these same subjects. After a series of epiphanies that resulted in Scott taking a new direction back in 2009, he created the epic film called Secrets in Plain Sight, which is a densely packed series about esoteric patterns found in art, architecture, and urban design. And this first work has been called Volume 1 and runs over 3 hours and 43 minutes. Over 5 million worldwide have seen Volume 1 on YouTube, which is remarkable considering its length and complexity, and many have watched it multiple times, including myself, absorbing new knowledge with each successive viewing. And since Scott has created Volume 2, which has been very well received, and you can currently check that out on his website. You can download it or get a DVD copy at secretsinplainsight.com. And with that also, he's also written 2 related books, Taking Measure, Explorations in Number, Architect, and Consciousness and Quantification, and illustrations from creator of Secrets in Plain Sight. And I just can't say enough about this man. I'm very excited for this interview. And Scott, welcome to Truth Warrior. Thanks for taking this time with me tonight.
Well, thanks so much for the glowing introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, you deserve it, my friend. And I also think it's pretty cool that you're also a fellow Canadian. You're up there in BC, beautiful British Columbia. And I was actually watching through the film again just to prepare for the interview tonight. And again, just pulling out so many nuggets of information. I just want to start off with the basic question. What was it that specifically got you into looking into this kind of architecture and this type of interpretation of these different geometrical, numerological, and symbolic patterns that were being discovered throughout various architecture in the world, as well as the planet itself and the layout? How did that really start opening up for you? Was it just sort of an introduction to some books, as I know you referenced in the film? Was it multiple things? Maybe just take us a little bit on that journey of how it got started for you.
Sure. Okay. Having a background in architecture and having a long interest in that, it was only natural for me to, be curious about world architecture. But I didn't start seeing these patterns until I moved up here to BC, to Cortez Island. And I just had, the space to read a bunch of books and start pondering some esoteric matters. And I don't know, it's just sort of one thing led to another. One of the milestones along my path was studying crop circles and drawing the designs in the computer, kind of as a hobby. I would just draw them for my own entertainment. And I found that process really kind of opened me up to sacred geometry. And that was an important milestone, as I said, because it got me deeper into geometry and number. And I think that was a key ingredient for me to start perceiving these patterns that I found on the earth and in buildings.
And we've seen this even here in Canada. I mean, a lot of people may be familiar with some of these structures and buildings and city designs in, places in Europe and in maybe even Latin America and America. But if I'm not mistaken, you've been covering even some stuff going on in Winnipeg. Did you have any bits of information to share about that?
Actually, that information comes from another researcher named Frank Albo, who found that the Manitoba Legislative Building in Winnipeg is just like this encoded Solomon's Temple, full of all this esoteric Freemasonic symbolism. In fact, in a way, it's like a replica of Solomon's Temple, complete with a cubic space that's 66.6 feet on edge. And there's even a replica of the Ark of the Covenant there. And so this is kind of tied into a lot of the symbolism that I traced in Secrets in Plain Sight, leading consistently back to ancient Egypt.
And that's a very interesting thing, because
pyramids and obelisks and so on.
Yeah, we've got.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, yeah, no. That's the obelisks and the Egyptian connection. This is also clearly relative to bodies of knowledge and study like Freemasonry and some of these other ways of looking at it. Getting into the Kabbalistic tree of life. You were pointing out how there's so many references to these ancient formulas and ancient ways of looking at things, and the numerological connections and the symbolic connections seem to always go back to a lot of these ancient cultures. You also see, if you think of something like Washington, D.C., you see a lot of Roman symbolism as well. And obviously that was also drawing from ages prior. I wondered what your feeling was on the nature, or I guess the intention. Let's talk about maybe what you think about the intention of the designers of these city structures, and the political houses and the banking houses, etc. I mean, is it all nefarious, or is it all benevolent, or is it a bit of both? I mean, we're really just talking about a body of knowledge here, and I think that knowledge in itself can just be a tool, and it can be a tool that can shape something that can build and help develop society and help empower people and inspire people. And on the other hand, it can be used to contain or to restrict or to maybe pursue power or dominance or building empires. Did you see that it was a bit of both, or did you see that it was maybe one more than the other? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I think in my personal journey, the first thing I thought was that there must be a conspiracy amongst architects to encode these numbers and alignments in their buildings. But as I continued to study this and I found more and more information, I started finding patterns in the solar system and in the shape of the Earth and so on. And then I started realizing that this is much deeper than or more vast than a human scope. Like we obviously can't construct the sun to be 333,000 times more massive than the Earth, but that's a fact. And yet we, like the highest degree in the Scottish Rite is the 33rd degree. And, there's all these resonances in mythology with 33, and Jesus lived 33 and a third years. The Great Retreat in Buddhism is 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. And there's a lot of resonances there. And so I start thinking that if there is a conspiracy, then the conspiracy is a lot deeper and spanning a lot more time, such that I'm no longer comfortable thinking of it as a conspiracy. I think that there's certain things that do happen at the level of human collusion and planning, but a lot of the more interesting things I find are deeper, and it causes you to kind of try to figure out how could that be, and I kind of leave the conclusion open so that each individual can supply their own metaphysics or explanation for how they see that happening. And some people think aliens are involved, and others think maybe demons or archons or your higher self is involved. And I think all of those explanations have a certain merit. And I think that they're not really necessarily mutually exclusive. I think all of these things could be happening. But, maybe I should give you an example so that people kind of know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, sure. Please do.
Okay, so since I agreed to go on this tour, I started thinking, I really haven't studied Canada very much with these alignments. And so I started looking at the big cities. And the first thing I thought was, well, I'm going to look at Toronto and Montreal. And I'm going to see if there's some relationship that those cities have with the center of the continent. And, Frank Albo says that the Manitoba Legislative Building is at the center of the continent. And more or less that's true. But also nearby is the International Peace Garden. And that's also, you could kind of say that's also in the center of North America. And in any sacred design, it's important to find the center and then to place important or sacred monuments in some relationship to that center. Well, what I did is I looked in Google Earth at the CN Tower in Toronto, and I measured the distance from there to the International Peace Garden. And it turns out that it's 66,666,666 inches, which is just mind-blowing to me. And then I went to Montreal in Google Earth, and I did a little quick research and figured out what's the tallest building there. And I drew a line from there to the International Peace Garden. And it's all sixes again. It's 6,666,666 feet. So it uses a different unit, feet, instead of inches. But it's all sixes. I mean, and if you think can just pull these numbers out of the air, I suggest you try to find something in Google Earth that has double resonances with all sixes. It's not something I've ever seen. And so this was really mind-blowing to me.
I guess when you're looking at these things, Scott, if a person maybe who hasn't really done this research or really watched any of your films, I find most of the critics out there are people that never sat through it and never watched it all or never really done a lot of research into this. They just think, oh, that's just impossible. There can't be all these coincidences. Do you think that, I guess when people look at this one case in isolation, it can be maybe hard for them to grasp it. But as you were describing in your journey in the film, it's the fact that you're seeing these kinds of things with very important structures and buildings again and again and again, and it's repeated. It's a pattern that keeps repeating itself. Would you say that
That's right.
is
it's
one of
the number of examples? I have so many examples of these things.
Yeah,
it's really just the data of it is, it's hard. It's easy to dismiss a few outliers. But when you start seeing how things are connected on the earth, you start to see there's this really deep ordering. And then, okay, so how can that happen? It's transcending time in some way. Either that or there's some very deep conspiracy that goes back a long time. Now, these Canadian examples that I just gave you are not very old. Maybe 100 years at the most. But let me give you another example. Cleopatra's Needle in London is an ancient Egyptian obelisk that once stood in Alexandria, Egypt. It stood there for almost 2,000 years before it was moved to London. And the distance it was moved is 3,333.3 kilometers. And okay, so again, how could that be? It's if it was a conspiracy that the Freemasons moved the obelisk to this specific location, fine. But how is it that London happens to be in the right place for that to happen? That's the really mind-blowing part.
Yeah, and you were giving examples also with, I believe it was Stonehenge and the quarry from which they pulled these rocks, apparently, which let's just, as you were saying, leave aside the scale and magnitude of that kind of an operation back in those days, but looking at just the numbers and the way that lines up, and you were showing the triangles and whatnot, the geometry there is just absolutely stunning. It's like you said, it's just beyond sitting there going, oh, that's just another incredible coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. It's you start to kind of question everything and kind of look at things in a new way, maybe. I just found, I think it was last night, I found, I measured the distance from the Space Needle in Seattle to the CN Tower in Toronto. And that's 3,333.33 kilometers.
Wow.
And actually, it's actually not true. It's 1 kilometer off of that. So on a graphic that I made, I show that it's only 99.93% accurate. But I show that because it's really dramatic to look at those two modern obelisks and see how far apart they are. And I find that oftentimes with these correlations, they're off by, let's say, a few hundredths of a percent. But if you can conscience that much error, you can perceive the pattern. And it's very little error.
Well, even the pyramid themselves, the Great Pyramid in Giza, I think it's off by like very, very, very slight degree or something when you're talking about absolutely 100% perfect geometry. And there's other things that, I don't know, maybe could factor into some of those errors as well, which could be just, the passage of time, things settle into place, or I guess possible changes in the topography from back then till now, the taking down of certain structures and the rebuilding of other structures. I mean, we know also that, say, Vatican Square is something that was built on top of older Druidic types of monuments and statues. So it could be that these grids a lot of times were already there in a much more perfect state. Although, like you said, we're just talking a few degrees or a few millimeters here. But if they had been desecrating and taking down, as different empires were going through, and then rebuilding on top of them because they knew that there was power in those places, or they knew that this was a way that it could be done. I don't know. I'm just sort of talking off the top of my head here, but did you ever think about that as well? At the fact that some of these places where these things are put are also put on top of, like, there's something that was taken away and then they were rebuilt on top of that place as well?
Yeah, it seems like certain places have a sacredness, and it doesn't really matter how much time goes by, the place is still important. And for example, there's another alignment I found, or distance, that relates to the International Peace Garden. In fact, there's a building there in the shape of the Freemason emblem, that is the square and compass design. And it's really curious because this building is designed like that in the floor plan. But I would think that if you were standing there on the site, you wouldn't really get it. You'd have to be in an airplane or looking at a satellite image to perceive it. Well, anyway, the distance from that building to the menhir alignments in Carnac, France, where they have all these standing stones from the Neolithic time, kind of contemporaneous with Stonehenge. The distance is 6666.6 kilometers. And, it's just, you can measure it in Google Earth, and don't take my word for it, but check it out. And furthermore, the location of that building, the very tip of the square, the corner of the square, is located at 100 degrees, 3 minutes, 33.33 seconds west longitude. So it's got all these threes in it. And that's what I find in my research, is that this code of repetitive digits is like the key that unlocks the door. And what's really weird is that it works with all different kinds of units. But I found that these units are all based on the dimensions of the Earth. And so in some sense, they're working because they're based on the Earth.
So in a sense, it's like earth science, or like they were modeling these structures, whether ancient or modern. There was a knowledge of the importance of laying them out and structuring them according to this pattern. It was as if they knew that, okay, if you want this kind of building or this kind of intention, because every building we manifest in physical reality, there's an intention behind it. It's not just a building that's standing there. It's either going to be a parliament building or a bank or a church or whatever it's going to be. And they strategically knew that if they're going to build that intention in their mind and then create it in physical manifestation, it's got to be in the maximum power zone, so to speak, or it's got to be where the momentum is going to flow. I guess in the Chinese culture, they talk about feng shui it's a very topical way of looking at it. But there's that concept where, you have to have it facing east, and your doorway has to be here. And when you put your head on your pillow, it has to be facing this direction in order to get all the energies aligning. So there is this ancient knowledge. And it's just so interesting to see even more modern structures replicating this as well. And then also correlating with other ancient sacred structures, right?
That's right. It seems to transcend time in some way. In other words, the plan is so deep that it's been going on for thousands of years. And that's when credulity is stretched beyond the limit, where I just don't believe it could be a conspiracy. I just don't think people could hold that kind of information secret for that period of time. And so I start thinking outside the box. okay, so if it's not a Freemason conspiracy necessarily, then what is it? Well, what if there were non-physical beings that were influencing decision makers? Or what if they are physical beings and they're aliens and they're influencing decision makers? Those things are possible. But it's also possible that they could be influencing people without them being consciously aware of that.
Yeah.
They might, build the building in the right place at the right height without even knowing the meaning of it. Because I think that if an architect knew the meaning of it, they'd make a coffee table book about how cool that was. And, why not? And also, if they're aware of it and they don't say, what benefit could you possibly get from having a certain sized building in a certain place? Some people have advanced theories that, it's like some kind of energy harvesting system, but I find that to be fairly far-fetched.
Well, let's pause there, Scott, because we're going to go to our break here. It's going to be the final break of the show. We've got a full segment on the other side. So, ladies and gentlemen, ponder these thoughts during the break, and we'll be back on Truth Warrior in about 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere. And we're back, folks. Welcome back. You're listening to Truth Warrior on truthfrequencyradio.com. I'm your host, David Whitehead. A pleasure to be here having a kick-ass show this evening with you, and I'm very excited about my two guests this evening. We had John Rappaport in the first hour, and we're here with Scott Onstott of secretsinplainsight.com. And Scott, before I bring you back, I just want to open up this segment with a quote that might illuminate a little bit of what we've been discussing. It's kind of a way back playback to the 1830s. Talking, of course, about Giuseppe Manzini, who was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he was appointed the head of the Bavarian Illuminati back in the mid-1830s, and he had this to say, which always kind of stuck in the back of my head, and I've read many other quotes like it, but I think it might kind of help us with our conversation here. And he says this, he says, "We form an association of brothers in all points of the globe. Yet there is one unseen that can hardly be felt, yet it weighs on us. Whence comes it? Where is it? No one knows, or at least no one tells. This association is secret, even to us, the veterans of the secret societies." Welcome back, Scott. What do you think about that?
Well, that's very interesting. It implies a deeper secret society, perhaps. What do you think?
Or a consciousness or something. Like they don't even know. He's like, there's something else. I mean, we're the top guys. We're the Masons. We know, but we all know there's something higher. There's something above us. There's something guiding. And it's just interesting that there's other quotes similar to this when you get into like Albert Pike's work and some of this other stuff where they're insinuating that there's another force that's sort of guiding, and it can be debated as to what force that is, whether it's malevolent or benevolent or what. And of course, even in religious history, you've got people, being pulled out onto mountains and being told information by entities and angels and demons and, whatever. You get into William Bramley's work. He's got some interesting takes on that. I don't know. When you put it all together, there does seem to be at least this backdrop that's there, no matter what element or no matter where you come into these subjects. And then what you're talking about is looking at the incredible synchronicity or all of these amazing coincidences or so-called coincidences that you can see that there is something bigger going on here, isn't there?
Yeah, it really challenges each person to try to explain it and try to figure it out. And I don't claim to know the answer. I just get better questions, and I get more information, and I get more and more evidence that suggests that there's a deeper patterning to reality going on. And I find that really interesting. It's almost like the Truman Show, where he woke up to realize that his whole life was kind of like an act. It was a show put on. or perhaps reality is a simulation. But ultimately, I think the most satisfying explanation is that reality is a work of imagination. And we've imagined, we being the creator, have imagined the entire universe using geometry and number. And that being the case, we couldn't resist the temptation to encode these little Easter eggs in our creation for our characters to one day uncover. Just like the Truman Show, when the light marked Sirius dropped from the sky in front of him, he realized that the whole universe was kind of set up. And he started, it caused him to join a larger picture. And in a way, I wonder if that's what we aren't kind of being invited to join, is a larger picture. To see that reality is kind of too perfect in a way. Like one way you can see that without even resorting to numbers or geometry at all is just to look up at the sun and the moon and to notice that they're exactly the same size. And this is so improbable, because what if the moon was smaller or larger or closer or farther away from us? If any, it's just perfect so that it totally covers the sun during a total solar eclipse. I mean, what are the chances of that? It seems pretty remote. And yet there it is. It's just right on.
Oh, exactly.
And so,
sorry.
Also,
continue.
we know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, please continue your thought. I'll jump in after.
Oh, just that we also know, scientists realize that the Earth is in this incredibly narrow band where life would be possible, where water would be liquid, and where we'd have water on the surface, and it wouldn't be a snowball, and that seems pretty improbable too. So there's these incredible rare things that happen that all kind of synchronize, and it gives us this experience of having these lives in these human bodies. But I question the literalness of that, and I start to look beyond that for deeper explanations. So it's a bit of a soul search that I've gone on through this process of Secrets in Plain Sight. And I think I've kind of inspired a lot of people to go on a similar journey. But I find that everyone their vantage point is very different, and some people are very conspiratorial, others are very New Age and think that it's angels. Other people are scientific and they want to see the data, and traditional people are convinced it's the work of Satan or some other prophet or demon or something. And so everybody has a different approach, and I try not to step on anybody's toes by telling you it's this way only and all the other people are wrong, because I don't think that. I think there's a partial truth in every explanation, and it's really just sort of aggregating all of that together to try to come at some deeper understanding is what it's all about.
I felt that, Scott, through your film. I felt that when you were presenting this information, you were just presenting the information, and you were trying to just give questions to people, not necessarily answers, because what you're looking at here is one of the great mysteries of our reality. And how can any one of us be arrogant enough to claim that we know the answer? I mean, this is actually part of the journey, and I think it's the ego that gets in the way and says, I want to know, I have to be the one that's right about this, I have to be the first one to break this, I have to be the one that has the final say. But that's not based in reality. The reality is that we don't ultimately know. But what we do know is that we're looking at a great mystery here. And if we can all admit that, as you said, this would be a significant journey of discovery, I think, internally as well as externally, right? As you said, this was something that helped develop you as a person. It developed the way you think, and I can see that you haven't just put your feet up and let the books gather dust on the shelf. You're continuing that process of learning, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I just can't help myself when I just feel inspired sometimes, and then things come out, and actually I really enjoy the process. And I've just gone on a little roller coaster in the last few days since I communicated with you. I've discovered all these things about Canada, and I told you some of them. And I've been really excited about that. You know, finding these modern obelisks are separated, you know, by a string of threes. You know, again, the Space Needle and the CN Tower are 3333.3 kilometers apart, approximately. Even Vancouver isn't excluded. The tallest building in Vancouver is called the Living Shangri-La. It's a residential tower that was just completed, and it's 66006666 inches to the center of the fountain in the International Peace Garden.
That's amazing.
Isn't that something?
That's amazing. And let people know, like, what are the methods that you use? Like, you mentioned Google Earth and whatnot. What are the methods that you use to come up with these numbers and to calculate all this?
Well, I just used Google Earth, and I used the ruler tool. You know, you just zoom in on a place, click the ruler tool on the target, and then go to the other place that you're interested in, and click the target. And then it will tell you how far that is. And there's a drop-down menu. You can choose different units. So you can see how far that is in nautical miles or inches or whatever. And I actually just follow my intuition. And so I don't do a whole lot of measuring in Google Earth, but, you know, occasionally I'll spend an evening fooling around. And I just sometimes have a sense that I should measure something. And sometimes I'm prompted. You know, the other day, a Facebook friend suggested that I look at these sites in India that were related to Buddha. And I'd never heard of the sites, but I looked them up on Wikipedia, and I zoomed into them, and I started measuring distances between significant places in Buddha's life. And I discovered that the distance from where Buddha was born to where he died is 333,333 feet.
Wow, no way.
And
That's
yeah. I have that here on my blog, I think, under update. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. So Buddha's birthplace in Lumbini, Nepal, to Buddha's cremation stupa in Kushinagar, India, is that far. And that really correlates nicely with the Buddhist retreat, which lasts for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. And, you know, what are the chances? I mean, it seems kind of everything is a setup.
Well, and in a way, it's interesting about Buddha, and you think about, you know, are some of these guys, there's always the debate about were any of these guys like literal people, or were they mythological characters that were representing concepts relating to something like the sun or the traversing of the sun or the concepts, you know, you have all these different ideas. But regardless of what it is, it's just incredible that the architecture and the layout is so accurate, and it has to do with this sacred geometry. I know you were also discussing
whether.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. It's also a question of how do people really know where Buddha was born and where he died?
Yeah.
And as you said, did he even exist? And those questions, in a way, don't really matter because people believe he did exist, and people believe that he was born in this very specific location. In fact, there's a rock there that has a plaque on it that says the exact birthplace of Buddha, marker stone. And then there's a big stupa, which is where he was cremated. And so this is official, even if it wasn't literally true, like maybe he didn't die right there, maybe he died a couple kilometers down the road, but this is where it's recorded, and that's where the distance is.
Yeah, that's so.
And in a way, that's all that really matters here. Yeah, like another great one that has this sacred religious connection is the distance from the Kaaba in Mecca, which of course is the most sacred place in Islam, to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, which is the most sacred place in Judaism. It's 666.6 nautical miles.
Wow.
And this transcends either religion.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But it shows us something, that there's a deeper order than the religions. It's patterning the universe.
It's interesting you speak about also the patterning of the universe. I had Marty Leeds on the show last night, who I know is a good friend of yours, and he actually was one of the guys to highly recommend we bring you on the tour, which I'm very grateful for. But we were talking about the sacred geometry of the body, right? The human body. You were mentioning, the anomalous aspects to the moon and the sun. And that this is a great mystery that, of course, they seem the same size in the sky, yet, of course, clearly they're not the same size, and that the distance is exactly perfect. And the same thing with your body. You have sacred geometry in your body. And there's so many correlations to us as beings and our relationship to this physical matter, and then the understandings of the space around us and the not even just the man-made structures, but the geometry of the planet, and looking at the positioning of rainforests or the positioning of mountains or the positioning of certain rivers and oceans. And then you take that up to the solar system, and then you take that up to the galaxy, and then you look at, as it just keeps going. It's as if it's very fractal in nature, isn't it?
Yes, and it reminds me of a graphic that's actually right above the Buddha graphic that I was just discussing on my blog. And it shows 4 things: neurons in the brain, a road network in France, the internet, that is a map of the entire internet, and the latest simulation from the European Space Center about the large-scale structure of the universe. And all 4 graphics look very similar. They have the same topology. And what it is, it's the natural way that information flows. It flows between nodes, like neurons, and it's connected to other nodes around it. Just like Paris is connected to Orléans and connected to Tours and Le Mans and so on. It's amazing because it's scale invariant. It works all the way from neurons all the way up to the large scale structure of the universe. And that kind of should make us wonder about the nature of the universe. And isn't it a flow of information? Also, when physicists look deeply into matter, looking for the thing at the heart of it all, they never find a thing. They just find relationships. And they find that there's nothing there. And in my lifetime, they've gone from 99.99999% nothing to 13 nines after the decimal point. So we've just gotten more accurate in our instrumentation in realizing that there's nothing there.
Wow.
But
sorry, that just blew my mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. But obviously we have experience. You're listening to me speak and you're having an internal experience of that, which is very real. and yet we're living in this matrix where there's really no thing there, and you're not a thing. Where is David? He's not a thing. David has a body, but I don't think you should settle for really being a thing. You're more than that.
Oh, thanks, Scott. I
So,
needed that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's you're at once nothing and everything.
Yeah.
And so I think it's this enlightenment sort of when you realize that you're not just this body, you are all things, and you are in a way the creator of the universe. And so at least this is how I'm looking at it. And to me, that explains how we see these resonances with number in our world. It's because we imagined the world using number and geometry in the first place. And we're having a kind of a playful game in letting our characters discover this. We're letting Truman figure out he's on the Truman Show. It's a really seminal moment, a really important transformative moment for humanity that's come with the internet, with Google Earth and all this information at our fingertips. We're able to measure things and realize things in ways we could not possibly do before. And so this has happened in just the last 10 years. And we're starting to figure out, wait a minute, it's too perfect. It's and that causes us to kind of reevaluate who we think we are in the first place.
It's so important as well what you're really bringing up there, Scott. And I love that you're referencing the Truman Show. I recently watched that movie again with my wife. It's one of our favorites, and I hadn't seen it in a while. And after watching it, I immediately went on Facebook because it just hit me, and I just posted something like, yeah, we're living in the Truman Show of the galaxy or something. Like it really hit me because I identify a lot with the character Truman, and I'm sure many people listening, and I'm sure you yourself, Scott, do as well when you're thinking about the journey of understanding and learning new things and looking at new things in a different way and realizing there's, and in one sense, an artificial nature to our environment. In another sense, there's also a patterned universal nature to our environment. And I love the journey that he goes on, where you mentioned about how you got the light that came down as Mark Sirius. He's kind of like, hey, what's that? That's not fitting, right? That's kind of like the first thing you realize that's just not right about the way you've perceived reality. And then later down the road, he looks behind, he goes into a building and there's an elevator closing and he sees like people there with clipboards and there's a set, and then they try to rush him out the building. He's kind of like, hey, that's not right. That's supposed to be just an elevator. And there's just all these little steps, one step at a time, where you slowly come to the realization that you are not perceiving things in the accurate way, and that there's a bigger story to be told, or a greater world. And then that symbolic ending scene, which I think is just the seminal moment in the film, where he is trying to escape and realize, no, I want to go explore. I want to go into the real world. And he realizes the courage that it takes to get up those stairs and walk out that door, leaving everything he knows behind. I just figured, you know what, that's how I feel, and I'm sure so many other people do when they start looking at this kind of information, where they have to leave behind that comfortable way of viewing things that they grew up with and say, you know what, am I going to be a slave to that and be comfortable in my chains, or am I going to be an explorer? Am I going to go out and explore these great questions? And the movie's brilliant in that way, and I think absolutely on a galactic scale, that's what's going on here on planet Earth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really a great way to look at it, and it's in some ways it's similar to the movie The Matrix, the original Matrix.
Oh yeah.
In how they discover that the reality is a simulation. But I think what I'm looking at is a little different. That I don't think that we're going to wake up and go out the door into the real world. or we're not going to wake up in our little chamber in like in the Matrix and you know have a real post-apocalyptic world to live in or something. But those are great for the dramas of that those movies are. But what I'm suggesting is that this universe is we're not going to wake up from it and be in the real world, because I think this is the real world.
Yeah.
As real is, you know.
It's just a perception, maybe, that could be altered. Maybe it's our perception that is the illusion, but there is the real world. There is this reality. It's just maybe our perception has been hijacked in a way.
Yeah, it's just a matter of perception. It's just looking at it different. That's all it is. You're the same person after. You still have to chop wood and carry water or whatever, or hopefully you have indoor plumbing. But,
well, Scott, the time's ticking away. Speaking of numbers and ratios and time and all of this, but I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm so excited that we're going to have you on the tour. I'm going to continuously look into your work. I'm excited to see the second film, Secrets in Plain Sight. I highly recommend anyone listening. It's extremely difficult to sum up this topic in 45 minutes on the show. So you've got to watch the film. You've got to do the research. You got to get onto Google Earth and use the tools yourself. And if you're in the area of, well, if you're living in Canada or you want to come and visit us this summer, beautiful time of year to come visit Canada, Scott is going to be on tour with us. We're talking about the Modern Knowledge Tour. We're very excited to have him. He's going to be one of the keynote speakers in Halifax, Charlottetown, Moncton, Montreal, and he's going to join us in Toronto as well. And so we would like to invite you all to come and check us out, and please support what we're doing with Modern Knowledge. It's a completely grassroots event, and it's just myself and Chris. We're just putting everything we've got into this to make it happen. So modernknowledge.ca is the website. Scott, I'm very excited to have you on the tour.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being included, and I really look forward to it. It should be a lot of fun and a real growth experience.
I'm sure we'll have many mind-blowing conversations on the way. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, the time is up. Thank you so much for listening. You can join me again next week on Truth Warrior. Have a great night, and we'll talk soon.